experience points often aren't the be all and the end all, but it's possible too that people quite rightly look and say, all right, what are we here for? All right, the reward mechanics work like this. Let's, so, but I agree with you that there is an aesthetic there that doesn't. Tunnels and Trolls has the same problem. It's if it is a problem, you can have really quirky, individualistic. In fact, it even solicits the game master to put themselves into the dungeon as a nemesis.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
It actually encourages you to be. The early Tunnels and Trolls has no real setting. There's a dragon-shaped continent called Ralph. In other words, Ken St. Andre just fucks around a little.
Yeah.
And that's all it got. But the main point is that, yes, this is freewheeling, wide open. It's 1975. Cool. Fantasy role-playing. Good idea. Throw it in, everybody. Every table is their own crazy fantasy. And look, you want some inspiration? You have Liz Danforth pictures to look at.
Yeah.
Disliked by literally no one. So, uninspiring to literally no one. And Errol Otis is the same way. Not everybody gets it, but if you do, it's on. If you do, that fantasy is on. I've got my aesthetic. Let's do it. So it could be done, but there you are. With all that going on, do you really want to go rooting through a dungeon?
That's part of the issue too. Yeah. And it gets to that kind of expectation of, well, what we're going to do with D&D versus what you maybe could do if you're just looking at the inspirational stuff. Say
if I look at that art, I want to go flying through the spell of a mad wizard on the back of a mutant dragonfly.
Yeah.
I don't want to start as a first level dwarf. I want to start as, a three-armed. I want to start as a three-armed half ogre.
And what's weird, this gets back to kind of my own issues. It's like, I'm like, well, I think it might be fun to just to start one of these games at like higher levels, and then I'm like, oh, but that's not fair, or that's not right. No, that's
an interesting point. Yeah, it's not correct in some ways. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I found personally, as I mentioned in a couple of posts lately, and also in that discussion, I recall that playing at first level, and I'm talking about now back around 1980, playing at first level, frankly, kind of blows.
Yeah.
And the magic user is effectively a baby bird, and and everybody else isn't much better. And as I claimed, the way that characters survived was pretty much through being being managed, being taken care of.
Yeah.
But many people really liked it at about fourth level. I know I've said it differently here and there as my mind bounced around, but I'd say fourth through seventh or eighth, maybe fourth through seventh level is a real nice, solid, way to play.
Yeah.
The number of hit points is manageable. It's just close enough to true injury that you can feel it in the fiction and yet understand it as the abstraction that it is. It's conceptually manageable.
Right.
Once you get up above that, they have to be abstract. They absolutely have to be abstract, and nobody's ready for doing that. And then there's a few other things too. I mean, it's not just the hit points. It's also the kind of sense of we've got options. When we run into a problem, there's 6 of us here. We've got options. There's a variety of spells, enough to worry about using. Limited enough to worry about using.
Right.
But still, a fair which one of our limited resources is appropriate for this situation, or even better, how can I spin this spell, which obviously the author of the spell in the book never dreamed I would use it this way. But hey, given the fictional situation, oh my God. And the DM is like, oh my God, you're going to use that spell. Well, that would have to be this. And you're like, right. And so all that sort of thing is possible without it being your one Hail Mary shot to make it through these giant rats and then go back, right? And then, scrounge through their feces for the copper coins and get out of here, right? Who wants to go through, that? No, it's better to be in a situation where the risk, the reward is interesting. You're fighting interesting beings at 4th level. The critters get interesting. They're up to something.
The dungeon master too. It's like, oh, I really want to use this type of monster, but it's like, oh, the 1st level characters. I gotta wait to use my fun monsters. That's
Absolutely,
a little.
Yeah. So there's and then of course the difficult point that we've talked about. Many of us have talked about multiple times, which is, what on earth is that traipsing from? What is a low level character? I mean, by the text, they're superior to everybody else who calls himself a fighter or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at their competence, they're crap. So what on earth are they? I don't get it. Why am I roaming around in plate armor when I'm this bad at it? And so to me, if I were to play Moldvay today, I just lay it down. 4th level's the way to go. We're going to do 4th level, and we'll level up as long as we feel like it, and that's what we'll do. There's also, we can continue to go on with details of table rules. For example, I see no reason not to shift out of the experience point paradigm quickly. Keep the levels if you must, but we're just going to play, an adventure and then everybody level up, right?
Right.
But the thing that is tricky with all of this is, at some point, I'm sure we each have our list. Let's just take Moldvay. Each of us has our list of the part of the rules where you look at it and you go, no. And for me, it's counting the experience points at that scale.
Yeah.
Right. They're off by a scale. If you're going to use points for that, they're off by a scale of 100 easily.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
For every, instead of 100 experience points, call that 1. Okay. Because they don't have any meaning below that. We all have our own list of things. For someone else, maybe they love the experience points for some reason or another, but for them, the races are all off. They've got their races and they make much better sense. It's perfect for the fantasy. They're going to use those. We're perilously into Heartbreaker land, aren't we? When we start talking like that.
I'm starting to take notes, and I'm in my brain I'm like, oh, this is I'm redesigning it. I'm like, oh, this is how it's going to work.
There you go. Right.
And,
mm-hmm. And so, and Heartbreaker territory isn't a bad place. There's a reason I said in the second essay, everybody should do it.
Yeah.
And part of it is to sort of exercise the demon and actually own the D&D-ness that you love. And say, aha, I don't have to keep going back to D&D looking for this. If you do that, then the benefit seems to be very strong. You sort of stop turning to D&D to get what you want from it.
What's interesting? Yeah. So this has been actually so kind of on a practical level. Just this this conversation, I'm now thinking of like, okay, this is how to do it by kind of rewriting the game and then presenting it as like, this is what we're going to do, and I think it'll be really fun. And I've kind of made these changes because I think it's going to be fun for us.
Well, you could even be a little more. How am I going to put it? This may not, I don't know how honest this is, but you could even say, listen, this is Moldvay D&D. I love the aesthetic. of this thing. Look at the pictures. This is great. But we're not going to use the rules. We're going to use these rules that I've got here. It's not D&D. And it's going to be fantasy, like based on this aesthetic, which is cool.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you're lying a little bit because you've preserved all the rules that you find okay or that you want to celebrate. But but that way you kind of, I'm saying like completely break with the idea. So you don't have to apologize for playing D&D, You don't have to sell them on it. I don't know. That seems a little dishonest. Maybe it depends on where you stand on the material once you're done scritching on it. Because I guarantee that those changes will continue past your first session. Even if you feel very strongly about it in prep and you've X'd out all the paragraphs you're not going to use, circled all the paragraphs that you really want to use,
Yeah.
inserted your own text right here for this spell. Okay, this spell works like this now, right?
Right.
You're all set to go. Well, 3 sessions in, you're going to go back and you're going to be editing further, right? You know that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
The thing that is, this is good in my opinion, and it may even have sort of a self, as I say, sort of a self therapeutic effect, right? Of actually celebrating the thing you love. But to do it, you kind of had to let go that you were playing D&D right. You have to let go of
yes.
that. I'm no longer under pressure to do that. And so it's it's a little weird. I don't know if it's depressing or disturbing, or maybe those are too strong. But I still have a very hard time with the notion of there's this other kind of role playing that we're going to put ourselves under a great deal of pressure to do right and to abide by. And it's important that we do it. It's culturally important that we abide by this way to play. But this way to play, it's supposed to give us total freedom, and yet you're supposed to conform completely. It's supposed to be this awesome fantasy, and it's a bunch of pastiche. It's supposed to be, dramatic and like dangerous and everything, but there is no mechanic for actually a single sword swing. There isn't. There's a mechanic for a combat round. There's no mechanic for a sword swing. What is it? What if you try to do a thing this one time with your sword? How do you do that anyway? And and everybody will suddenly start throwing their hands in the air and saying, well, obviously you do this. And I say, show me in Moldvay.
Right.
And they can't find it. It's not there.
Yeah.
So the notion of, well, you can, I mean, how do you talk to, what happens when you talk to the guy? I don't know. How do we play? I talk to the guy. What is that? And so it's curiously underprepared. The systems in question, all of them, are curiously underprepared for the range of role playing that they're supposed to be providing. And I guess, I'm pretty much talking about before 3rd edition. 3rd edition now does have rules for interaction and stuff like that. I personally think that they are borked from hell, to hell and gone. It's one of the authors of 3rd edition described it to me very accurately. He said it is the brilliant and innovative role-playing game of 1987. And he's absolutely right. It's all of the sort of skill sets of Danger International and, the GURPS Fantasy and stuff like that. All this kind of notions of how you resolve actions, and this is a diplomacy roll, and this is, your charm score, and all this kind of stuff. This is the way we do it. And then you just basically, dress it up in a little D&D talk. And we all know it's the rule set. I mean, they're explicit. It's Talos Lanza. They just took the Talos Lanza rule set and pasted the 3 to 18 characteristics on it where they do nothing. And so so I'm not really talking about that and its further work like Pathfinder and stuff like that. I'm talking about Dungeons and Dragons as a cultural phenomenon, the kind that was soaked up as what it is, and that's well before 3rd edition. So with that in mind, I'm saying that the rules that we find for it and the settings that we find for it are frighteningly inadequate for doing it. The behaviorally, how does a character act? Shit, man, people can't even answer that question. How do you role play? What's your game instrument of your character's behavior? What are your levers? What is your, can you do whatever you want? No. You've got your class and your race. No. You've got your alignment. Wait a minute. How does that work? Can't I be the elf who likes dwarves?
Right.
You know, can't I be the, you know, so if I crack open Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and actually read the alignment rules, I suddenly discover that I can act off alignment as much as I want to, as long as I act on alignment more often. Then I will never be penalized. No one can ever tell me I can't do it, and I'll never be penalized if I do that. How many D&D groups out there actually would agree with that assessment for alignment?
No, I mean, I think it's like even if you read it aloud to people before you start playing, it doesn't. It's. I mean, because it's right there on your sheet. It's like one of the only things on your sheet telling you anything about that stuff. So of course, it's going to have a lot of weight.
There is an ideological statement with each one, and so people have a tendency to see those 2 words on the sheet, and then hop to the ideological statement and say, "Okay, so I do that. That's how I'm supposed to be."
Right.
And the whole notion that you can operate off of alignment situationally, and for the most part with no consequence at all, is
right.
You know, that's gone. That's just, I don't care how many times Gygax kept rewriting that paragraph. No one ever, you know, internalized it. And so the point though is that we don't know. I mean, and we know what happens at tables when people have different notions. Well, I don't have to do it all the time, do I? You know, wait, really? I have to do it all the time? You know, you would do this. Yeah. I would.
Yeah.
And so there's these odd, or, you know, even better, right? I do this thing. Wait a minute, you did that? What a jerk. Oh, it's my alignment.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, that goes on too, right?
No, I know, I love that. One of my favorite things, one of my favorite kind of excuses.
Mm-hmm. But the point being is that it's not any of these behaviors specifically that I'm objecting to. What I'm talking about is the level of confusion about what those words on your sheet actually mean as play instrument. It's the confusion that I'm interested in, not taking sides in the never-ending debate, right?